Introduced to Sowards, a passionate gardener and the owner of Violetear Studio. Jill's expertise spans a wide range of gardening and design topics, and she shares her knowledge through classes and workshops across the Bay Area, as well as online. No matter what subject she's teaching, her focus is always on ecological gardening practices, ensuring that we cultivate not only beautiful gardens, but also sustainable, environmentally friendly spaces. Interestingly, Jill's journey into gardening began in a different field. She was originally trained as a public interest lawyer, which I Googled and found out is a branch of law that focuses on issues like civil rights, environmental protection, healthcare access, and poverty. However, Jill soon discovered that the power of the garden could offer people a deeper, more personal connection to the world around them. Jill believes that everyone, no matter their background, can benefit from the joy and healing that come from building a nurturing relationship with the natural world. Today, she's here to share her knowledge about gardening in dry shade, one of the more challenging areas in many of our gardens. So without further ado, let's welcome Jill Sowards.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you this evening. Again, my name is Jill. This is the shade garden, the dry, and we're in California, so it's the dry shade garden. I'm going to be working. Oh, right. Does it work? Am I doing the lights? No. I'm a lawyer and a gardener, not a tech.
Yeah, we have had this problem before. So it's like this job. Battery. Yeah. Okay. Okay. And we tried before. And it worked before.
I'm not that tall.
Sorry for the delay. Why isn't this? Why? Sorry. Jacker?
We're now going to have a musical interlude. No, but we have a lot of things in the back table that might warrant people's attention. There's a bunch of blue oak acorns you can help yourself with. There's a bunch of guava fruit. It is a mass year, actually. And actually, on my street, there's a ton of black walnuts, in case anybody is a lover of black walnuts. Let me know. I think they're a pretty tree. I don't think they're as allelopathic as people say either.
I have never seen live walnuts before because squirrels always got them, and so this year there's so many that. Yeah, I don't know if walnuts do the same thing, but
The oaks around me were really, really heavy, so I'm not sure if that was bigger last year. But that's really
yeah. We didn't have a good oak acorn harvest last year, but this year it's pretty amazing. Like for my property in about, I don't know, I'd say 2 weeks, we're going to be raining coast live oak acorns, like a massive amount. But anyways, so I know other people are getting black oak acorns, which is a really cool plant, and that's supposed to be the favorite edible acorn for Native Americans. It's the least tannic. And that's the one, it's a deciduous oak, and its leaves are probably yellow at this point, if you happen to be seeing one around.
You are. The quickest about the valley oak.
So
is my
it's
favorite,
not
but I
in
live on
slideshow.
hill in Berkeley, so it's kind of not something that is available to me. Yeah, yeah. Exactly, yeah.
Mm. We worked when we tested it. We worked when we tested it.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I know.
They're not even. Oh, so we're not seeing the same, even though you're in slideshow. Everybody has a pass crowd around. Oh, yeah, that's. You're showing them, it's showing.
What do you want?
This is.
Yeah. We're not doing the same. Yeah.
Everyone's even not seeing anything. I can begin. Wait, that was a slide. One of you up. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
It's not on here.
It's
not on here.
But it's useful to know that I work with as a lawyer, it's because I come up with an agenda.
and say.
What we'll talk about today are the qualities of the shade
hold it
garden,
up for-
types of
No, I
shade,
know.
and then some shade specific hair highlights, and then a little unit on oaks and redwoods, because we're lucky enough to have so many in our.
Sorry, people, we couldn't get those. We should tell her that. Yeah, Jen.
And so this is a picture of shade garden. This is that's Chatto's garden in UK. I take, if you are at all familiar with her books, I think she's a wonderful resource.
You didn't
Obviously,
click on this, huh?
she actually uses a number of California natives, although not all of them are, but I think it's a really lovely series of planting. But what's interesting is it's a part of England that has
This is
a
not-
sort of
wait, wait.
rain shadow, and so she actually gets about 1 to 2 inches of
Let me show
less.
you.
Yikes.
Which is, I think, a really unique shade situation. That said, whenever you're looking, at any resources from a different country or even throughout the United States, know that the California sun, the amount of sun that we have and the intensity of the sun is always different. So while she does have less, an equivalent amount of rain, she has,
Something to do with
much-
sharing the screen.
much less overall sun, hours of sun are less. So what is a shade garden? You may know, but it's plants that thrive in less than 4 but no more than 6 hours of sun a day. And then I think speaking with some of you earlier at the little restaurant meeting, and just now, I think all of you are devoted gardeners, so you will be excited to know that there are many more creative. It's a creative challenge. I think it's a chance to really connect so much and benefit so much from all of our gardening spaces. So qualities of plants in shade, very often they are a little bit slower growing. That's because their photosynthesis usually takes them a little bit longer. That's why you get often wider and thinner leaves. They're more likely to be perennial over annual, simply because they sort of need to have sort of a longer period of growth and coming to maturity. Often you have fewer blooms, although even though you have fewer blooms, and the colors are occasionally paler, they often will last for much longer and retain any color that they do have for much longer because they don't get washed out. They don't go over as quickly. A few other qualities, they're often thinner and leggier. I think this especially comes from plants that are on that sort of, can handle a couple different sun types and shade types. You often have, again, larger, thinner leaves, again, that sort of spreading for photosynthesis. And by having a thinner cell wall, you have a thinner cell plate, you can reach more sun. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity when we know this about our plants and how they will be growing to really embrace that and use that as a design, as an intentional part of our design. Go for the sort of longer, graceful arches and things like that. And again, that ability to have these thinner leaves, different color leaves. The thin leaves, they catch the light, I think, in a really beautiful way, especially that sort of under, you have the free light that's coming under the tree. The darkness adds a lot of drama and depth. Any colors that are available, especially those paler colors, will really pop and have a lot of sparkle. And then I think there's also let's say misinformation, but often a lack of awareness of how many plants, especially if they are already growing on, not necessarily starting from seed, but are already growing on, will adapt to shade very well. And so it's a wonderful way when we have plants in our garden that can do, work in a couple different spaces. It's a great unifier. It's not the shade garden that's forgotten because we're not as familiar with those plants. But it's actually a way that you can, again, sort of create that, the design element of your seeing friends, throughout the space. So some virtues of the shade garden. One is that there's virtue. One is, again, slower growing, virtues, the S jumped down. Slower growing, but they look better for longer, because they will just hold their shape, they'll hold, you won't have to do as much pruning, deadheading, mulching, weeding, watering, all of those things are sort of done for you, or because they're sort of moving slower at a slower pace, you won't need to do as much. So definitely consider, I think, not to say overplanting your, I'm always an advocate of overplanting, but you don't need to necessarily overplant, but know that because you have, because they will be slightly slower growing, sometimes you can push those boundaries in terms of size and how much you're fitting in. The other is there's more consistent temperature. Often we're not dealing with huge frosts, but that microclimate that's created by a sheltered space, especially when it's from trees and plants, it blocks frost. It can block really pounding rain. It can obviously block sun, and create a lot of protection from wind too. And so for all of those reasons, a lot of tender plants that aren't working well elsewhere, if they can take a little bit of shade, they're suffering from rock and things like that, see if they won't be happier in a shadier spot. And there's also a sort of a ceiling and flooring temperature. The temperature doesn't get, usually will be cooler overall, but also doesn't drop as much. So it's shelter and sun protection. It's not only protection for your plants, but it's also protection and habitat for birds and insects. And I always like to say it's a place for humans. After I would say like April at 11 a.m. I'm usually in the shady part of the garden, no matter what, going through to now. And because often the soil will stay cooler and damper for longer, it's a place where a lot of your beneficial soil microorganisms will live the longest. And that is, a really key part of keeping a healthy and vibrant garden is having spaces where those are still able to live throughout the season, usually under a pile of leaves. The other thing that I love about the shade garden is that it's very immersive. I think even when you have a smaller gardening space, if you do have some shade, the minute you walk into that, it's like, kind of crossing some some curtain line, veil line. It's again sheltered. It's a place to relax. It's a place to sort of be protected and look out from. And so I think it has some of those experiences, almost like the secret garden, the den, you know, built under the shrubs or something. And the other, and while it's always wonderful again to create a continuity in your garden by repeating plants throughout. I think it's also obviously a wonderful opportunity to try something different and unique that can, you know, only grow in shade and sort of, again, in that sheltered spot, come upon it and sort of be surprised by it, you know, season to season. I also, what we'll talk about when we talk about the different types of shade is to just recognize how dynamic shade can be because of sort of the way the sun moves across our sky or we move around the sun. The sun, the type of sun, the amount of sun, how it's coming to your plants will be different throughout the year. And so it can be, once you're sort of aware of what is happening from season to season, you can really start playing with how you're planting, what's growing. And then the one sort of I would say the two areas that I think are some of the most dynamic are those emergent plants. Sort of the early spring emergent plants will often be they will often come a little bit later, but that means you have an extended season. So in a sunnier spot, they'll come out, and then you have a little bit of a lag, which I really appreciate it because it's a chance to kind of have more of what you're enjoying. But also later in the season, you have some plants that are able to catch up and sort of they're not growing as fast, and so they'll put on late color. So you'll have sort of an extended season, an extended spring in shade, and then you also have plants that finally collect all their sort of sun hours later in the season and will bloom, especially those on kind of the, I call it like the apron, you know, around a tree in terms of shade. So the types of shade, this would be an example of a deciduous tree. We have bulbs underneath, and then that, you know, that canopy may cover your daffodils later, but they've had sort of their moment and something else can grow under that needs more shade than the daffodils do. So types of shade, they're obviously you know, created by all different kinds of things, including structures, plants, and then again, these sort of seasonal aspects. Something that isn't creating shade will be depending on where the sun is located. Again, the type of the year not only directs sort of where the sun is in the sky, but also whether there's deciduous trees, the ones that, you know, lose their leaves, whether they're in bud stage, leafed out, or losing their leaves, that will all affect, you know, how much is coming down. And then finally, you have within a shady space, you often will have different layers. So you'll have a tree near the trunk is up, you know, often sort of closer canopy, darker, and then at the edge it will be dappled, or you'll have the sort of bursts of sun underneath the edges. So wherever you're working on, I think sometimes we think that the shade plants that we're maybe purchasing or bringing in are not growing well because they actually don't have a consistent shade space. So you just have to kind of know how test your zones. And the easiest way to do that is, if you have patience, just set a date every single sort of, you know, quarterly and check. In each of those months, have one day where you check the sunlight at 9, noon, and 3, and that will give you an idea. And it's just amazing how much of a shift you have. And I think it's a great way, again, to sort of learn how to observe within your garden space. And so so again, so you probably know this, but there's less sunlight in the winter, and there's more in the summer, but it's, again, it can be as much as a 5-hour difference, you know, and the sort of earliest to the latest, which can mean a lot for a plant. The angle of the sun, of course, changes throughout the year. It's coming in under, you know, really like this direction, truly angled right now. And while the sun is not as, we don't have as many hours, it's coming under a tree line. It can be a really direct sort of scorching when it is hot. So when we have those 2 weeks of that 2-week heat wave, a lot of plants that sort of had never experienced such things. We're getting a lot of heat, and I know a lot of gardeners lost plants in that because it was sunlight coming under a plant canopy, a tree canopy that usually didn't have that much heat. And then again, the presence or absence of foliage in deciduous trees. So in the east, so with your east-facing aspect, these are the daily changes. In the morning, you'll have more sun. Usually that's kind of a cooler sun. It's the same amount of sunlight, the same, you know, photosynthesis can occur, but it's usually for a plant that doesn't want a lot of heat, especially if you're sort of pushing a hardiness zone. You would want your plant to be get that morning sun as opposed to afternoon sun. West facing, you'll have the most sun in the afternoon and evening, and again, that's usually sort of a hotter sun. The north has a little dark light, but it's very consistent. It can often be very bright light, and it's kind of the same throughout the year. So plants that really want that consistency will be happy there. And then south, depending on any other shade you have, you'll be getting the most sun and direct sun. And then something else to note, because walls are often a creator of shade. They often they retain heat and can radiate it back throughout the day and evening. So that's often a much hotter spot. So if you're having any challenges, you think you have a shady spot and you don't know why these shade plants aren't happy, it may be because you need to be sort of like a hotter, drier plant as opposed to something that's like a cool shade plant. So this is a shade garden that's filled with a lot of plants that work in a lot of different gardening spots in terms of shade and sun. So I'll talk briefly about these different types of shade. First is light shade. And again, I think of 5 to 6 hours of direct sun at any type of day. So it could be a solid section or between buildings coming in bursts, or it can also be consistent indirect sun for an urban courtyard. In California, if there was a plant label that said part sun, light sun, something like that, or shade, I would just give it full sun. I would treat it as a full sun plant because again, our sun is just hotter. It's more sun, per hour than anywhere else. These are some of the plants that would work in this type of shade and sort of, the next rung down also. And I will give to Ava the plant list if you're interested in this set. Filtered or daffodils. This is 5 hours of indirect or diffuse light. So there's never a true sunlight hitting a leaf. And a lot of plants that are shade plants are in this category, so the true shade plants are in this category. They do want sun, but they don't want direct sun. And so again, if you're seeing scorch, if you're seeing drying on anything, they're just sort of failing to thrive. That's often a reason that you are getting some direct sunlight at some point. It's a little too much for them. But again, as you can see, that's sort of that 5 hours. It's the indirect is the important piece as opposed to the hours. So here an example is this philodendron. This isn't the native philodendron. It has the same properties, which is that it really does not appreciate sun directly on its leaves. It wants very little of that, so much better in dapple, but it can sort of be in a very lightly, bright sun spot. And then semi-partial shade, these are the terms you'll see on the plant label. That's 4 or 5 hours of direct sunlight over a full day. So again, you can have bursts under an oak of 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon, kind of coming in at an angle. But again, it's not sort of in the dapple. It is direct and it has that photosynthesis moment of like intense photosynthesis. And I give this note here that again, if you have a shade plant, which often the label will sort of be the same between these two, the partial and the I'll go back, and the filtered. But some of those plants, that's sort of the distinction you can observe is that one is happy and one is not. And here are some of the plants that are happy in that sort of that direct burst of sunlight. And again, we'll work sort of in either direction, higher or lower. And so just a brief interlude when you're playing with shade. If the label reads sun or part shade, I would use filtered or semi. I wouldn't use light, that sort of 5, just at 5 in direct light because, and again, avoid afternoon sun. I think in general, that is a little too hot for those like part shade plants. And if you're seeing any of that scorching, if you're seeing a plant struggling, you can move it to a deeper shade. Or make it like a cooler shade again cooler sun. So moving it into a spot where it's getting morning light as opposed to afternoon light and seeing if that works for you. The same again, if I say pushing a USDA to hardiness zone, if you're trying for a zone 8, for example, many of those plants will do fine. Again, they just don't like that afternoon heat. They don't like afternoon direct sunlight. So moderate medium, that's about 2 to 3 hours of direct sunlight at any part of the day. And usually this is sort of an eastern or western facing gap. So you're against a building, you get morning sunlight and then pretty quickly the cover of a building comes up. So it's close to that building. Here's some of the plants that might work well there. And again, I will send this to you. So you need to write it down. And then full shade, deep shade, anything less than 2 hours of direct sunlight. So this is closer to the trunk of an evergreen tree if it's choosing to grow there. Or again, a built up area, window box, north facing, all of those might fall into this deep shade. Although again, north facing in like a house that has a lot of access to, really open around it, would be right too. So dry shade, that's pretty much our shade. It is somewhat seasonal in the sense that our dry shade areas there, for instance, under a tree might retain water for longer. It will be moister in the spring, sort of like vernal moist. But by end of May, it will be dry shade. Usually it's just the fact that we have dry soil in general is present, but it's also exacerbated by tree and shrub roots, which are sort of challenging, outcompeting maybe some of your plants. Any overhang, so the canopy or or a building structure that's creating a rain shadow, so rain sort of falling and not hitting the ground directly underneath it. And so always when you're buying a plant, and I'm sure you do this, or when you're growing from seed, check that you have a moderate or low water need plant. A lot of shade plants are bog plants because they're meant for these shady, wet areas, and not every single. So it's just more of a research issue. Always cross reference. Not every single nursery or every single label will give you the information to show you to tell you sort of what the need, like the natural habitat is of some of these plants. But wherever you are, if you are struggling with like water retention or the lack of, one thing you can do is if you're making your own compost or can get it from a source that you know to be relatively non-toxic. Then you can add compost to your soil, and that will help with water retention. This is a great time to do it because we're capturing this early season rain. And then also you can cover with any of your own collected leaves or great mulch, or even more compost or mulch, and that just traps in that water. And so you're layering it. You're again feeding those microorganisms, feeding those worms that are creating all the oxygenated tunnels for water to come down. So it's I think that is probably the best sort of best water solution, is not quite water itself. And so these pardon me, these were the deep shade examples. And then, so a few notes for shade specific care. Again, we talked about how our plants are growing often leggier, they're reaching toward the light. And sometimes if they're growing under a tree that is itself extending its canopy, they will sort of reach with it, they're sort of following the same lines, which again, I think is a lovely look, that everybody's sort of leaning toward the light. But you sometimes have, especially if you do get a heavy rain, those thinner, leggier plants, or whether by wind or rain or even leaf fall onto them, they can sometimes topple and they will snap or they'll crush someone beneath them and it collapse. So great to always be considering when you're planting or as you're doing your care, staking. So one method that I call it corral staking. So whenever you're staking, and that just means you're putting sort of like straight, I wouldn't say object, you use a cane, a stick that you found. You can buy those like metal stakes. Setting that next to your plant and in some way, connecting the two such that the stake is holding up your plant. And I say connecting the two because the sort of traditional method is to stake where you put a single stake right next to your plant, sort of tied to it. That can look very rigid, and I think it's the reason why a lot of us, besides the fact that it takes time, don't always stake, and then you want to do it after the fact. And so what I prefer to do is what I call corral staking. And so essentially you just take, whenever you're staking, always try to select a length of your stake length should be half of your mature plant height. And that's because you don't want to be growing stakes interspersed with flowers. You want to be growing flowers, you want to see those, and they really only need support to about their kind of midway up. So if you take your stakes at half measure, and kind of make either, sort of a general circle of sorts around your plant, do a triangle, do a square, and then loop your, loop twine around the stakes, that will give it sort of like a gentle hold as opposed to like a really rigid hold. I think it allows the plant to move sort of naturally, and it will sort of choose to kind of lean, wherever it tends to fall, wants to fall, without actually crushing anyone or snapping. The other is sort of similar style, it would be a permanent hurdle, which is shown there. Or if you have a plant that has a really obvious direction, is like, falling forward, you could just do a more traditional hurdle, which just looks like a piece of fence, and truly a piece of fence will work. You can have old pallets, it does not need to be fancy, just put a little, upside down U shape, and you can like lean that way. And again, I just think it has a much more natural look, and that way you're not, you don't have a bunch of stakes in the ground instead of plants. The other is hygiene and airflow. Again, even though we have very, it's been seen with dry air, you wouldn't need to worry about this sort of thing, but that sort of combination of dry air and dry soil and moist air that we can get with fog or evening moisture, actually is especially conducive to a lot of fungal growth, which is fun. There's also, there's like a powdery mildew. It's like best life is lived between something like 72 degrees and 84 or something. So it's like summer. No one else is exactly that, like, window of heat temperature. So when you have that, and again, it's sort of the benefit of having this overhang is that it's creating this lovely moist microclimate for your flowers. So one thing to check is that you're watering sufficiently. Usually it doesn't mean increasing water, but changing to make sure that you're watering deeply as opposed to like doing multiple short water like watering times if you have an irrigation system. The other is if you do have a set timer, I always say if someone says, oh, my plants are getting enough water or they're getting fungal disease, rather than again increasing water, if you have the capacity to do it, set your timer. So if you're doing, let's say 10 minutes, do 2 sets of 5 to make sure that the water is really getting a chance to go deeply in before water is coming again, so that it's not being lost anywhere. Because often once you've set it, you're probably following the right instructions in terms of how much to give it. It's just not getting kind of captured properly. So I always try that first. The other is overcrowding. I know earlier I said definitely overcrowding plants don't. But that's, if you're seeing sort of a humid area, again, because often the shade is created by structures, it's created by trees, it's created by something that's limiting a little bit of that airflow. That's one thing you can do. And then also if you just have a plant that is especially prone and they need to just move to a spot that is not, has fewer neighbors. So that can be another fix. Another sort of care consideration is leaf drop. So leaves can sometimes smother or damage other plants beneath them. Usually you can just brush them off. You can use if you have one of those leaf rakes that have sort of the springy tongs, that works very well. You can also grow what I call a blocker, grow a shrub that can sort of take a little more heavy dropping. And then and then those are, I think those are usually the easiest solutions, unless, something keeps getting sort of the brunt of some leaf drop, just moving the plant into a spot that it won't. And then whenever you do have leaves, definitely collect them and use them elsewhere. They're hugely beneficial to the soil. Now is the perfect time to be collecting them and redistributing them. So never put them in your compost because they won't do as much good for you there. And the other wonderful thing about shade, and something to always be considering, is it's a wonderful spot for creating habitats. So you can create bug hotels, dead hedges. It's a system of, it's just stacking, limbs and things that all your sort of cuttings without making like a formal compost pile. But when you do that, it's an easy fix or easy spot to do sort of behind the big tree that's creating shade, or behind the shrub. And it's just all that sort of half dead spaces and nooks and crannies all be used by birds and bees and insects. A lot of our native bees, we've probably had a talk on this, are ground dwellers and solitary bees. And so they love that kind of in-between protected space where no one else is going to walk on them because there's something hanging over it, but they can still go in and out. So it will be well used. So some highlight plants, I mentioned that I would be talking about hellebores. They're great to put in now. They're going to come up very soon. Some of them are already blooming. The cherry blossom, apricot blush, and New York night, those are all hybrids. And the Corsican hellebore is a species from Corsica. And is a little bit taller and actually can tolerate a fair amount. I would say even drier conditions, and certainly a little more sun. So if you do have a spot that kind of shifts throughout the season, that's a great option. But hellebores are wonderful. Because they grow, they're, quite, dramatically tasteful flowers that appear in sort of true winter. They have evergreen leaves that are beautiful, sort of variegated color, and again, very, very drought tolerant. They're great in pots, and they can take deep shade to dappled shade, and I find they're pretty neat in the sense that they don't push out their neighbors. They don't have a lot of spread. They rarely set seed. If they do, it's sort of in their immediate apron, so they're easy to catch. They're not going to take over. So they're both sort of polite neighbors, but have this wonderful show in the winter, and then sort of just sit quietly by themselves through the blazing summer. And another sort of pair with them are a geranium and an anemone. In sort of a 1, 2, 3, with hellebores taking up the winter season, geranium being sort of spring, and the anemone being fall. All appreciate the same growing conditions. All of them, I would say, the geranium can take more direct sun, but the Japanese anemone prefers, again, more dappled sun if you can give it to it. It can take some sun, again, that sort of morning direct sun would be fine for it. But if you could sort of create a very floriferous, if that is a concern for you, the sort of fewer flowers of shape gardening, it's a floriferous kind of pairing, year-long scheme. And then bulbs are always wonderful under in shade spots. They can grow there happily both in sun and shade. So again, it's another sort of emergent plant that can create a lot of unity in your garden. You can put these in sun and in shade. So 3 favorites: the Narcissus Talia, it's a multi-headed Narcissus daffodil, great hyacinth, and then Camasia, and it's like Landii, the California Camasia. That prefers, I would say that is would prefer dappled shade. The others can handle more direct sunlight, so you spread it. I would say the Camasia you can't as easily. Here are, let's see, 3 native shrubs and 1 non-native shrub, but you have it in the back there, the oak leaf hydrangea. This is the Carpinteria California, again, another beautiful bloomer that really loves shade. All of the ribes are wonderful shade friends, and they have such a sculptural look. The really beautiful flowers, again, a wonderful winter sort of option if you don't already grow it. Hydrangea would be sort of the opposite, late summer option. And the Sambucus has kind of year-round interest. It has those beautiful flowers. I know it can also handle a range of growing conditions. It's pictured in a field without any cover. It has beautiful flowers that are edible, and then those gorgeous berries at the end of the season. So although I will say, I don't know if anyone else has a different experience. Between Toyon, which is more of a sun lover, and Sambucus, I find that of the sort of our native berried shrubs, I find that Sambucus, the birds in my area tend to choose it sort of last. I don't know why. I would go first. They look so pretty. But they always get eaten, but I don't know. Are they not tasty? I don't know. But again, a really lovely option. And again, if you can pair it with something that the birds will eat first, it's like a longer buffet. And so I just wanted to highlight redwoods and oaks, because if you were lucky enough to have one in your garden or in any space that you garden, again, I envy you, but I know that they also can be a little bit difficult to decide what to plant under. So they're beautiful. They are supporting all these incredible species. It's a habitat that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world, and it's really wide-ranging. redwoods are integral to the, the sort of habitat creation of coho salmon, even though they would seem to not be in the same zone. But they can be tricky. So again, the soil is often dry. There's a lot of root competition, but you also need to really protect those roots because they're surface roots. They're pretty delicate. I think every neighborhood is a story of someone like laying a dry, strip of concrete over an oak roots in order to like make a dining area or something, and then having it fall on top of said dining area. And then again, watering, you always want to plant and fall on water sparingly, sort of let that natural cycle be occurring. So you don't want to do a lot of additional irrigation. Again, no walking, limited digging, and then the leaves and needles can just create a lot of weight on your other plants if they're falling heavily. The theory is that that because they are acidic as they fall, it's also creating a really acidic soil. It tends to neutralize over time. It's just they have acid in them, but the actual soil, it shouldn't affect the pH so much that it shouldn't be super acidic. But choosing acidic leaning plants is not always a bad idea with them. So if you're designing under either of these two, the first question you will ask yourself is, do I want to build a fuller planting or more of a woodland? A fuller planting would sort of have layers. You have your top layer, you maybe have a mid layer of trees, shrubs, and then down onto your, your lower side, smaller perennials. A woodland, I think of that as more of a gap. You have your upstairs tree, and then your downstairs, you have a lot of low planting. So you have a lot, more like you're seeing through to whatever you're seeing through to. On purpose. And then also, decide how much leaf monitoring you want to do. So if you do have a very heavy fall spot, just count whether or not you want to worry about fussing with knocking, the leaves off or needles off of a shrub. So we get for redwoods, again, leaf drop, you can try to just avoid delicate plants and then consider the acid lovers. You want to avoid planting at least 4 feet from the trunk, and then heavy mulching within 10 feet, again, because of the surface roots that you want to protect. They want to breathe as opposed to be covered. Always, we're probably all avoiding sprinklers, but just in case. and then reducing drip irrigation around the tree as much as possible, because it sort of self-waters in that microclimate in the fog line. And then if you can, leave those leaves, leave the needles, they're feeding the soil. And then I normally through plants at this time, but I'm mindful that the hour is turning. And so I will send that to Ava so that you have some of my favorites. Because they are redwoods, the best pairings are almost all natives. So hopefully there are some new introductions for you. For oaks, I will say few plants grow naturally under oaks, and I always use that as a design guide. But I think again, when you embrace that look and sort of treat that as your base, it will make it look right because it's something that your eye naturally will see. So again, keep all plants 4 to 6 feet away from the trunk, and then limit that mulch again, although you can get a little bit closer to the redwood. Same rules on irrigation and same rules on leaving plant drop. And this is again, because you get to plant a little bit closer at 4 to 6 planting base, plant to base of tree rule. And again, I have a list for you. Some of them are similar, some of them they're different, but with all of the redwood list and all of the oak list, I think they will work anywhere that you have shade. They are, very adaptable. They don't need these conditions. They're just some of the hardy ones that can handle these conditions. So a quick recap. Shade is beautiful. I'm sure you all know that, but and again, I think it can be really interesting, really dynamic. I think the reason that it is sometimes is a trouble spot is because we don't realize how much of any one condition is actually under our shade. So we're forgetting how much sun can get under there. We forget about how dry it gets, even though it's very wet at other times of the year. So again, it's about, sort of making sure it's maybe an area that we need to check in on more, and perhaps because it is sometimes a little bit hard to figure out, we don't. But again, it takes, the best thing you can do is just observe, check in on your plants, see what they're responding to. Test different plants in different spots. Again, usually I find shade is a really great way to have these sort of scientific experiments. Because things tend to do, better there once you've installed them. And then again, make sure you just have the right set, sort of your soil is in good health. You're making sure you're staking so that nothing is collapsing. And then again, experiment with your shape. It's very nuanced, but again, I think it can be one of the most rewarding parts of the garden. So thank you very much. It was fun.
Do you have any photos of plants you put under redwoods in your presentation now?
And in my presentation now, no, but I can include those, the slides that would normally be there, for, send the, list if you'd like them. Yeah. Yes,
What are your favorites under redwoods?
so under redwoods, very, very quickly, like.
Well,
or,
shrub or even lower, ground covers,
um,
low flowers.
I would say the. Actually, I'm gonna pop back, sorry, close your eyes. We're gonna go fast.
That's okay.
The Carpinteria californica and the varieties are both lovely. I think varieties because it's not so squat, it's, tall and kind of long limbed. I think those are wonderful. And then, the Camassia is also great. And then actually hellebores are wonderful.
Yeah,
under-
yeah.
And the Corsican hellebore is great. I always, hesitant to include the Hellebores frutidus. Your pretend Latin, frutidus like fetid. When you cut into it, it smells kind of meaty, but it only come upon that if you're like pruning it. But it's a really beautiful color. It looks a lot like the Corsican hellebore, but has these sort of bell-shaped flowers that have like a little lip of pink, so that lime green, really, really beautiful, and that's another one that's great, and that has kind of range of sizes. So I would say those are all great ones, but again, I'll send you the full list.
And then like with your hellebores, are these your favorites or?
That's a great question. I really love the Corsican hellebore. That's probably my favorite. The problem with the hybrids is they have every single gorgeous color. I love all of these and they grow really well. All of the it's called the it's like cheesy plant names for 100 plays. The Fire and Ice series, so it's like Fire and Ice Pink. Those are really, really beautiful, lot of length. And so yeah, I would say hellebores, that's a great Googleable option. Just pick your favorite color. But again, I think that the depth of that purple is so beautiful. And then the cherry, that, center is lovely. So all of those are fun. Yeah, but they're a little hard to pick a favorite. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, yes, they do. It's really like a mauvey gray. Yes, if you are worried about, so you can either pull up the ceilings, the comment was very apt, which is that if they are crossing, you sometimes get kind of a mauvey gray color instead of all of these lovely ones. So if you do, they will usually retain their feature if you limit yourself to, one or two, or keep them at like a bit of a distance, or you can just pull the seedlings, and they divide really, really easily, so you can, outpace the seedlings too. Good point. I kind of want them to be, that's kind of cool, no? Hard no, okay.
Another thing,
Yeah.
I had a really high grade.
Mhm. Yes.
And a month ago, I pulled it out and then put it like this.
Just surprised I hadn't touched it before. Wow. Yeah, the Hellebores this year are like working in teams. They're so like, well, always need to have their burst. We're gonna catch up to them, but everyone's losing things. So, for all gophers, I don't buy the gopher cages because I think they're too practical. I think they're too big. Just wrap in chicken wire if you do replant. But that's my best sort of gopher saver. The other is you can get any member of the allium family, so gophers can't see underground, they're smelling everything. So if you can truly just get, your sprouting garlic in the kitchen counts. Just plug those in throughout your garden, and it kind of confuses them, and so they'll hopefully leave. But that's my other, I think, safe, like the two of those, in combination or alone are probably my strongest that, or get my hound dog to dig up 100 holes and catch one gopher. He is absolutely for hire.
He'll also bark at the hole for a bit. It's great.
Trying to scare it back up. Yes,
So of the ribes, which ones do you like?
which ones are, I would say again, go with your favorite color, there's, and I'm gonna say the. Person's name is escaping me, it's sort of that true pink, and then there's, pardon me, sorry, you can hear me, there's a true pink, and then, that's going this way, right? A true pink, then there's like a light and a white, and I don't know why it's gonna be the later hour, I'm conflating them, but I'll send that, so I can do like a separate breakout for those if you want multiple colors. Yeah.